and welcome to our 43rd Annual Policy Seminar, where we will level up, unite voices, and create change. As our chair-elect shared, this is the oldest activity of COE. I made sure to fact-check this with our immediate past president, Maureen Wheeler, and she told me that literally the day after COE incorporated in 1981, about 40 TRIO educators went to Capitol Hill to advocate for TRIO. So while this event may be a new experience for some of you and an annual occurrence for others, I want us to take in the significance of the event, because as we reflect on 60 years of TRIO, something becomes patently clear. TRIO would not exist but for the advocacy, the efforts, the personal sacrifices made by educators like yourselves year after year. Because TRIO was an experiment. It was literally a demonstration project in the form of Upward Bound that emerged along with several other social welfare programs like Head Start and the Job Corps during President Johnson's war on poverty. And as new college access efforts joined the fold, Talent Search in 1965, Student Support Services in 1968, EOC and VUB in 1972, TRIO leaders from places like Milwaukee, San Antonio, Laramie, Tallahassee, and many other places strategically organized their colleagues at the state, regional, and finally the national levels to ensure the stability and growth of this thing we call TRIO. By capturing the attention of federal legislators, like the iconic Shirley Chisholm of Brooklyn, like the dynamic Louis Stokes of Cleveland, this multiracial, multi-state coalition of leaders planted and nurtured the seeds that would grow into this billion-dollar enterprise known as the federal TRIO programs. So while it's very easy to look at our standing today as the largest federal infrastructure supporting low-income, first-generation college-goers, we would be remiss if we did not reflect on and continue to implement the lessons that were hard-won by our forefathers and foremothers in TRIO. So what have we learned? First, TRIO programs and the TRIO Coalition are multiracial networks unified by the principle of access and success for low-income, potential first-generation college graduates. Now, I am no historian, nor am I a presidential scholar, but I firmly believe that President Johnson had a more than realistic view of what it would take to transform the racial dynamic of this country. So in many ways, the war on poverty was the Trojan horse, if you will, the vehicle by which they were going to usher in legislative advances to improve the lives of people of color in this country. And like President Johnson, our early TRIO leaders had the foresight to recognize that one day the pendulum that was driving efforts to equalize the playing field was going to come crashing back. And today, as anti-DEI efforts are sweeping the country, we seem to have arrived at that moment. And so we must lean in to our focus on low-income, first-generation students. For as we know, those characteristics cross-cut racial and geographic lines, which is why TRIO is able to exist virtually every place the American flag flies. This has been and must continue to be our North Star. And while many others will wave the first-generation flag, let it be clear that it was the TRIO community that introduced this concept into the higher education lexicon. So what else have we learned in these 60 years? Well, we know that TRIO security is tied to the fact that we are a bipartisan, bicamerally supported program. We draw support from both parties and across both sides of the Capitol. As advocates for other programs that have come and gone, we'll tell you, you cannot rely on a single person or a single party, because politics is like the weather. You know it's going to change. And as a result of this strategy, we've seen legislators from the most conservative wings and the most progressive wings of their respective parties come together and hold hands around TRIO. And if you don't believe me, go back to the 2017 Upward Bound competition, where members of the Freedom Caucus got together with members of the Congressional Black Caucus to get the Department of Education to reverse its decision to toss out applications based on things like font size and spacing. So convenings like the policy seminar allow us to reinforce our relationships with our current champions and cultivate relationships with new ones. Another critical lesson we've learned is that you cannot divorce policy from politics. Neither exists in a vacuum. The two are inextricably tied to one another. And understanding that nuance is what allows us to play full-court basketball, if you will. We've got key players positioned to pass, shoot, and score when the opportunity arises. But in public policy, as in sports, there's always multiple rounds. So today, at the policy seminar in March of 2024, we are in the first quarter. And I promise you that we will not be finished until the game goes into overtime after the November elections. Therefore, we must remain vigilant and engaged throughout the next several months. It's time for us to level up. So what are we fighting for? First, and always first, is the money. This week, Congress is attempting to finalize its fiscal year 2024 appropriations legislation, which will fund TRIO programs in year 24-25. Now, if you happen to catch the news earlier today, you might have seen that there's been a slowdown in negotiations related to border security, and that there's actually another threat of another partial government shutdown looming. But when Congress completes its work, based on the intelligence of COE's policy team, it is most likely that we will end up with level funding. Now, when you go to the Hill on Wednesday, many congressional offices will tell you they're too busy trying to finish FY24 to talk to you about FY25. But we're starting our campaign now because we know we can't wait. And so when we go to the Hill, first we're going to be asking for $68 million more for TRIO in FY25. So what are the components of this request? First, we are mirroring the Biden administration's request for a $20 million increase in TRIO, $15 million of which would be used to grow the Student Support Services program in the next competition. If moved through, this funding would result in at least an additional 55 programs. The administration also calls for a $5 million investment in national activities to, and I quote, support and advance the objectives of TRIO programs through a range of potential activities, including evidence-based student models and the suite of TRIO programs. I don't know what that means either. But we'll work to find out what the department has in mind. So that's our first $20 million. The second component of our request is a $48 million increase to provide a 4% inflationary increase to all current TRIO programs. We all know that inflation has had a profound impact on your work. From the cost of books, software, and supplies to serve your students' needs, to renting a bus and getting gas for college visits. And that's not even to mention keeping pace with salaries to support your staff, to retain them and recruit them. So we're going to be asking for $48 million to help with inflation. But beyond funding, there are other needs that our programs have. But unlike funding, these needs and these requests are not necessarily black and white. So first, the better FAFSA. Okay, We've talked a lot about that today. And as I shared earlier, I have to give the department some credit. They've been working very closely with COE, with other student advocacy groups, to do their best to ease the pain as we are rolling out this new process. But despite these efforts, we know that things are not necessarily simpler for our programs. Particularly, we know that our college-based programs can no longer access the student tax information. And in a recent poll of our SSS and McNair communities, 83% of you responded that that's how you previously determined your students' eligibility, by working with your financial aid offices. So we know that this is a major problem. But like most things in Washington, there's not an easy fix. There's not a politician on Capitol Hill that wants to break open the tax code or revisit the Higher Education Act. Now, the good news is that almost everyone we've spoken to on Capitol Hill recognizes that this was an unintended consequence that needs to be fixed. Unfortunately for us, it will take action by both the House Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee to deal with the tax side, and the House Education and Workforce Committee and the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee to deal with the education side. So our mission is simply to create buzz, to spread the word, to let Congress know that this is a problem and it's a big deal. And if they want to help us, they've got to push their colleagues on these committees to do something about it. You know, 1 or 2 lobbyists from COE can't get that done, but hundreds of you can. And then our last bit of advocacy push for this policy seminar. By show of hands, how many of you have ever gotten your grant awards maybe a week before the grant expired? Less than a week. Okay. After the grant had expired? Okay. Well, for those of you who are on SSS or plan to write for SSS, we know that the clock is ticking for the next competition. And because of the cyclical nature of TRIO grants, if one competition is off, it throws off the next set of competitions. So this next ask is for everybody, even if you are not writing for SSS. We've been in talk with the department for some time about timing. Deputy Assistant Secretary Miller referred to it earlier today. However, as an extra layer of assurance, a bipartisan team of senators, many of whom have heard from you when your notices were late, have sent a letter today, actually, to Secretary Cardona about this issue, and have urged him to ensure a timely rollout of the SSS grant competition to include releasing all award notifications at least 3 months before the current grants expire. We had about 16 senators, both Republicans and Democrats, sign on, and copies of this letter are going to be available for our team leaders at the team leader meeting and then later at our team leader table in the registration area. But we want you to please take this to Capitol Hill, and when you go there, if you're meeting with the senator who signed on, thank them. And if you're meeting with a senator who did not, or a House representative, you just want to let them know about the situation and ask them how they can help make sure that the department starts the SSS grant competition on time. I know we've given you a lot of water to carry on Capitol Hill, but that's why we're here, and that's why the policy seminar exists. And as I said earlier, this is just the first quarter. We will be beating this drum throughout 2024. So with that, I'm happy to entertain any questions you might have. Thank you.
Please use the microphones in the center of the aisles and state your name, institution, and program before asking your question.
Madam President, Sergio Alves, California Lutheran University TRIO Pre-University Programs. With respects to the SSS deadline and the timetable that we're pushing the message for, is that hopefully easy to find in the resources? Is there a particular place where we can find it so that we know what to reference?
Yes, so the actual copy of the letter will be with the team leaders and it'll be in the team leader folders, but also we're going to add it to the, because we just got it this afternoon, we will put that in the policy manual, the first folder, so you should be able to access it pretty simply. That was easy. I'm happy to take my seat if there are no questions, so thank you.